Hi, my name is Omar Saleh, and I want to share with you the story of how my life changed forever. This isn't an easy story for me to tell, but I believe it's one that needs to be heard. What happened to me just a few years ago took me from the depths of doubt and confusion to a place of truth and peace I never thought possible. It all started on May 14th, 2018, a date I will never forget. Before that day, I was a very different person. I was living in the small mountain town of Crestwood Springs, Colorado, working as a civil engineer. On the outside, my life looked perfect. I had a stable job, a loving wife named Sarah, and 2 wonderful kids. But on the inside, I was struggling with questions I couldn't ignore. To understand my story, you have to know where I came from. I grew up in a traditional Muslim family in Dearborn, Michigan. My parents had immigrated from Jordan before I was born, bringing with them their culture, their language, and their faith. From as early as I can remember, Islam was everything in our home. My father always said, "This is the one true path. Follow it without question, and you will be rewarded." So, I followed. Every weekend, I went to the mosque for Islamic school where I memorized the Quran in Arabic, even though I didn't understand most of what I was saying. The teachers told us that reciting the words was enough, that Allah would reward us for our obedience. I didn't question it. I was too afraid to. At home, we lived by strict rules. We didn't celebrate birthdays or holidays like Christmas, and my sisters wore the hijab as soon as they turned 12. It was all I knew. As I got older, though, cracks began to form in my faith. In high school, I started noticing how different my life was compared to my non-Muslim friends. They seemed so free to eat what they wanted, wear what they wanted, and date who they wanted. Meanwhile, I was weighed down by rules I didn't fully understand. But I pushed those thoughts aside. Doubt, I was told, was dangerous. It could lead me astray, and I didn't want to risk angering Allah or disappointing my family. After graduating high school, I went to college to study engineering. It was there that I met Hannah, a Christian girl who became one of my closest friends. Hannah was different from anyone I'd met before. She didn't try to push her beliefs on me, but she wasn't afraid to ask questions about mine. One day, she asked me something that stuck with me. "Omar," she said, "why would Allah send good people to hell just because they don't believe in Him? That doesn't sound like a loving God." I didn't have an answer. I wanted to defend my faith, but deep down, I had the same questions. Were all the non-Muslims I knew, people like Hannah, really doomed to hell? It didn't seem fair. But instead of facing those doubts, I buried them deeper and became even more devoted. I grew a beard, started wearing traditional clothes, and spent more time at the mosque. I thought that if I just tried harder, the doubts would go away. Years later, after getting married and moving to Crestwood Springs, those doubts came back with a vengeance. On the surface, my life was perfect. I had a good job, a loving family, and a close-knit Muslim community. But inside, I was struggling. The more I learned about the world, the harder it was to reconcile some of the teachings I'd grown up with. I read about scientific discoveries that didn't align with the Quran's account of creation. I learned about the violent history of Islamic conquests, stories that didn't fit with the peaceful religion I thought I knew. And then there were the dreams. I started having nightmares about hell, about people I knew burning in fire simply because they weren't Muslim. These weren't strangers, they were friends, colleagues, and neighbors. I would wake up in a cold sweat, terrified and filled with guilt for even questioning my faith. One day, out of desperation, I stumbled onto a website that criticized Islam. At first, I was angry. I wanted to prove them wrong, to defend my beliefs. But as I read more, I couldn't ignore the contradictions they pointed out. They talked about inconsistencies in the Quran, troubling aspects of Muhammad's life, and how some teachings didn't make sense in the modern world. It felt like my whole world was crumbling, but I couldn't talk to anyone about what I was going through. I was scared of being labeled a traitor, of losing my family and my community. So, I lived a double life. On the outside, I was still the devout Muslim husband and father everyone expected me to be. I went to the mosque, fasted during Ramadan, and taught my kids about Islam. But inside, I was filled with doubt. Then came the day that changed everything. It was May 14th, 2018, a normal, sunny morning like any other. I got up early, had breakfast with Sarah and the kids, and drove to work at a construction site on the outskirts of town. I remember feeling distant, lost in my thoughts about faith and the mounting doubts that were eating away at me. I kept replaying questions in my mind, questions I was too afraid to say out loud. By the time I arrived at the site, I was so distracted that I barely noticed the work around me. My job that day was to inspect some wiring on the 4th floor of a building under construction. As I climbed up, I couldn't shake the thoughts racing through my mind. Is this all a lie? What if everything I've believed is wrong? What happens to me if I walk away from Islam? And then, in an instant, everything changed. I was walking across a narrow wooden beam, balancing carefully as I looked over the wiring plans. I didn't even notice the loose board under my foot until it was too late. Suddenly, I felt it give way, and I lost my balance. My stomach dropped as I tumbled backward, the ground rushing up to meet me. I remember flailing, reaching out for something, anything to grab onto, but there was nothing. The last thing I saw was the sky above me and the concrete far below. Then everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't at the construction site anymore. I wasn't anywhere I recognized. Instead, I found myself floating in a vast, dark space. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but this felt different. Sharper. More real than any dream I'd ever had. I looked down at my hands, but they weren't there. I didn't have a body at all. I was just consciousness. And then I noticed the light. It started as a tiny speck in the distance, like a star in the night sky. But it grew brighter and brighter, pulling me toward it. I couldn't resist. It was like a magnet, drawing me in with a force I couldn't explain. As I moved closer, I began to hear voices. They were soft at first, just whispers, but they grew louder the closer I got. The voices were speaking in all different languages, yet I could understand them all. They were telling their life stories. Stories of love, loss, joy, and sorrow. Each voice felt so personal, so raw. It was as if I was hearing the entire tapestry of human existence all at once. And then I saw him. Among the swirling lights and voices, one figure stood out. He was glowing brighter than anything else, and his presence radiated love and warmth. I knew instantly who he was. It was Jesus. As a Muslim, I had been taught that Jesus was just a prophet, a messenger of God. But in that moment, I knew that wasn't true. The love and power that radiated from him were beyond anything I could have imagined. He wasn't just a prophet. He was the Son of God. Jesus didn't speak with words, but I could hear his voice in my mind. It was calm, yet full of authority. "Welcome, my child," he said. "You have many questions. Come, let me show you the truth." In that instant, I felt all my doubts and fears melt away. I knew I was in the presence of the one who held all the answers, the one who had been reaching out to me all along, even when I was too afraid to listen. Jesus lifted me up, and suddenly, I found myself in a place unlike anything I'd ever seen. It looked like a library, but the shelves stretched endlessly in every direction. Each book radiated light, and when I looked at them, I didn't just see words. I saw entire stories playing out in my mind like vivid, living movies. "These are the true stories of all religions," Jesus said. "See for yourself what is true and what is not." I was drawn to one book in particular, one that I somehow knew was about Islam. As I focused on it, scenes began to play in my mind. I saw Muhammad receiving revelations, but something was wrong. The angel delivering them didn't look holy or peaceful. It looked dark and menacing. I saw Muhammad leading armies, ordering the deaths of those who opposed him. This wasn't the peaceful prophet I had been taught about. Then I saw the Quran being compiled after Muhammad's death. I watched as men argued over what should be included and what should be left out. Some verses were forgotten. Others were changed. This book that I had been taught was the perfect, unchanging Word of God was actually pieced together by fallible humans. Jesus showed me the violent history of Islamic conquests, wars, forced conversions, and suffering. While there were moments of peace, much of the spread of Islam was achieved through fear and bloodshed. I saw how women and minorities were treated, how people were silenced for questioning the faith. And then he showed me something even more heartbreaking. I saw millions of souls, good, kind people trapped in darkness. They weren't evil, they were simply lost, clinging to beliefs that kept them separated from the truth. My heart broke for them. These were the people I had grown up with, the people I loved. And I realized that I had been just as lost as they were. But Jesus didn't show me these things to condemn me. He showed me to free me. He wanted me to understand the truth, to see the chains that had been holding me back. As Jesus showed me these truths, I felt an overwhelming mix of emotions. There was sadness for the life I had lived in ignorance, guilt for the doubts I had ignored, and a deep sense of longing to do something, to make things right. But there was also peace. For the first time, I felt like I truly understood who God was, a God of love, truth, and mercy. Then Jesus spoke to me again. His voice was calm, but filled with purpose. "Omar," he said, "your time here is not yet over. You have seen the truth, and now you must share it. There are many who are searching just as you were, and they need to hear what you have seen." I hesitated. The thought of returning to my life, to the doubts and struggles, was overwhelming. I wanted to stay in this place of peace forever. But deep down, I knew he was right. There was work to be done, and I couldn't stay here while others were trapped in the darkness I had just escaped from. "I'm ready," I told him, though my voice trembled. "I'll do what you ask." Jesus smiled at me, and in that moment I felt a warmth unlike anything I had ever known. Then everything around me began to fade, the light, the voices, and the infinite library of truths. The next thing I knew, I was gasping for air. When I opened my eyes, I was back in my body. My entire body ached and my head was pounding. The bright fluorescent lights above me were almost blinding, and it took me a moment to realize where I was. A nurse was standing over me, checking my vitals, and my wife, Sarah, was sitting by my side, her eyes red and puffy from crying. "Omar, you're awake," she said, grabbing my hand. Relief washed over her face, but behind it, I could see fear. I later learned that I had been unconscious for nearly 24 hours after the fall. The doctors had said it was a miracle I survived at all, let alone without major injuries. But I knew that wasn't the real miracle. The real miracle was what I had experienced during those moments when my heart had stopped. The days and weeks after the accident were some of the most challenging of my life. Physically, I was healing, but spiritually and emotionally, I was on fire. I wanted to tell everyone what I had seen, to share the truths that Jesus had shown me. But I quickly realized it wouldn't be that simple. The first person I told was Sarah. I thought she would be relieved, even happy, to hear about my experience. But instead, she looked at me with a mix of confusion and disbelief. "Omar," she said softly, "you've been through so much. Maybe this was just a dream. You hit your head pretty hard." "It wasn't a dream," I told her firmly. "Sarah, I know what I saw. I know what I felt. Jesus is real. He is the Son of God, and everything we've been taught about him is wrong." Her face fell, and I could see the fear in her eyes. "Omar, please, don't talk like this. What will people think? What about the kids? What about the mosque? Her words cut deep. I hadn't even thought about how this would affect my family, my community, and my reputation. For years, I had been seen as a devout Muslim, a leader in our small community. If I came forward with what I had experienced, I knew it would change everything. When I finally started to share my story, the reaction was even worse than I had feared. Friends I had known for years stopped talking to me. My coworkers avoided me. At the mosque, people whispered behind my back, calling me a traitor and an apostate. One day, the imam pulled me aside after prayer. "Omar," he said, "I've heard some concerning things. People are saying you're questioning Islam. Do you know how serious this is? Do you know what this could do to your family?" I looked him in the eye and said, "I'm not questioning Islam. I'm rejecting it. I've seen the truth, and I can't stay silent anymore." The look on his face was a mix of shock and anger. He told me I wasn't welcome at the mosque anymore and that I was no longer part of the community. It hurt more than I could put into words, but deep down I knew I was doing the right thing. In the months that followed, I began to rebuild my life, not as a Muslim, but as a follower of Christ. I found a small church in town where I met other believers who welcomed me with open arms. They didn't judge me for my past or question my journey. They simply loved me and helped me grow in my new faith. Reading the Bible for the first time was like a breath of fresh air. Every word felt alive, speaking directly to my heart. The more I read, the more I realized how much Jesus had been pursuing me all along, even when I was lost in doubt and fear. My relationship with Sarah was strained at first. She struggled to understand my decision, and there were times when I thought our marriage wouldn't survive. But over time, she began to see the change in me, the peace, the joy, and the unwavering faith that replaced the doubts that had once consumed me. Eventually, she started asking her own questions, and today, she is walking with Christ alongside me. Looking back, I can see how God was working in my life every step of the way. He used my doubts, my questions, and even my fall to bring me closer to Him. What I once thought was the worst day of my life turned out to be the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with hope, purpose, and truth. Today, I dedicate my time to sharing my story with others who are searching for answers. Whether they're Muslims struggling with doubts or Christians looking to strengthen their faith, I want them to know that God is real, that He loves them, and that He has a plan for their lives. If my story has touched your heart, I encourage you to take a moment to reflect. Are there areas in your life where you've been searching for answers or clinging to beliefs that don't bring peace? I want you to know that the truth is out there, and it's found in Jesus Christ. Please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this message, and subscribe to this channel for more life-changing testimonies. Together, we can spread the hope and love of Christ to a world that desperately needs it.